With 2022 wrapping up and 2023 being in full swing, it is now time to get the coveted top 25 that every coaster YouTuber is required to make out of the way. And this year, I actually got on quite a few new rides. I went to 2 new parks this year with Magic Mountain and Silver Dollar City, and there are quite a few placements from those parks on the list. I also shifted my list around a little bit from last year, even though I haven't been to most of the parks again. I kind of just changed how I rank rides. Before I rank them based on my experience immediately on the ride, but I feel like that's not the best way to rank rides because I don't remember exactly how I felt like 6 months after I rode it. So instead, now I rank rides based on how much I would want to ride them again right now. Keeping that in mind, let's get into the top 25 because there are a lot of coasters to talk about and I don't want this to be an editing nightmare. This moved down a little bit, but still managed to squeeze onto the list. Originally, I had this higher than Millennium Force, but as time has passed, I realized that it's fun, but it's still a B&M looper. The keyholes are cool, it's a pretty ride, and it actually has some airtime, but there's nothing really here that wows me. There's no one moment that I can't stop thinking about. It's just all very solid. And that's fine for a B&M looper, but it's not gonna make it much higher on the list that has massive RMCs and Intamins and B&M's better models.
In New York, I'm Millie Rock.
That's how I'm gonna play because of copyright, but you get the joke, it's Millie.
This also moved down a little, and again, it's not because it's a worst ride. I've just found what I like in Millennium Force in other rides. First of all, I think this is the most hyperish ride of all of the Gigas. Yes, even more than Orion. This ride just seems like a super scaled hyper twister with this large airtime hills and sweeping turns. Like even Orion has some Giga gimmicks that this just doesn't have. And I get that if that's what you're looking for, you want a speed machine with pops of airtime and spurts of intensity, then this is a fine ride. But for me, it's just not what I want in a Giga coaster. I want a Giga to be mind-numbingly intense. Like literally, I want to gray out on a Giga, and Millie just doesn't do that for me. It's not as bad as that clickbait video I made a little while ago, but like it's not amazing either. So yeah, it holds onto a spot in this year's list, but next year it probably won't be here. Okay, I get that this is like a beloved ride by a lot of people, and I kind of understand why. Time Traveler has this charm, and that's kind of true for all the rides at Silver Dollar City, but like especially Time Traveler is like a very charming ride, but it's not really like a fantastic ride to me. Like it kind of just feels like this is what a B&M spinning coaster would be. It's fine, there are some cool moments, but it's a very safe pick. I get that it's the prototype and all, but I feel like there could have been a little bit more. Like the ride launches in the second half to go up a hill, and then it's just over. What? Again, I know it's the prototype, but that just seems kind of lazy. It's like the lift hill at the end of Ninja that trolls you and takes you back to the station. Now, I'm not saying this ride is Ninja, because like, it's not, but it's not a first-class ride either. I like the drop out of the station, I like the twisted airtime hills, I like the hillside setting, and the theming is really cool, but like Gatekeeper, there's just not a whole lot here that sticks out to me as amazing. I think this ride is a lot better to talk about than it is to ride, because yeah, the Extreme Spinner has a lot of potential, and that potential is realized with Ride to Happiness in Belgium, but it's not really showcased here, and that's why it's a little lower than you might have expected. Another ride from another new park. This one, I think I overhyped a little too much in my head. X2 was closed on my visit to Magic Mountain, so I kind of tricked myself into thinking that this coaster was still good enough to make up for that. And while I still really liked Magic Mountain, this ride was not what made it so. It's not a bad ride. I know I've been talking negatively kind of about it, but it's obviously still good enough to make the list. But you know, it just might be lower than what X2 is, unfortunately. Still a little salty about that, but whatever. The ride itself is pure fun. The racing aspect really does make it a lot better, and I gotta say there are a bunch of really fun elements scattered throughout this thing. The first high five on both sides gives crazy sideways airtime. The launches that get you up to the high fives are also pretty good. There's good inversions, and the helix at the end was actually pretty forceful. I grayed out on both sides, which is unexpected on a premier launch coaster of all things. I will say stopping in the middle is a little bit awkward, especially since they didn't seem to be in all that much of a rush to dispatch, but once you get going again, the ride is a blast on the second half. This is my highest ranked invert, and I've talked about why I like this ride a lot, like literally in my second to last video, like ranking the B&M rides. But in short, I really like the setting, the inversions all hit, and the helix at the beginning is a nice touch that gives it some character. I'm not gonna go super in depth here because there's really not much to talk about. This is another one that I've talked about a lot, but last year, I'm pretty sure I skipped over this ride, so we'll talk about it again. The launch of this ride is really good. Like, it's surprisingly forceful, because from the outside, like, it looks like an average launch. It's a Gerstlauer of all things. Like, why would the launch be powerful? But then you actually get on it, you get to the launch, and it's like blasting off into space. That might be hyperbole, but you get what I'm saying. It's a great way to kick off the ride. Actually, it doesn't even kick off the ride. You have like an airtime filled drop right at the beginning and a hang time filled heart roll. These are both really fun and also better than you'd expect. The rest of the ride after this is massive inversions that look and feel bigger inside the metal cage that is American Dream. That's the only good thing about being in a shipping container setting for the park. It makes all the rides seem huge, and these inversions are no exception. And we can't talk about this ride without talking about the drop. Yes, this is the steepest drop in the world, and while the drop is crazy, it's not the best part of the ride. It's fun fun, but it's not as good as the launch or the twisted airtime hill. You do feel those 121.5 degrees though. It's a bizarre feeling bending inside yourself and not being able to see the bottom of the drop at the top. And once you're just stalling there, slowly creeping forward, your heart will be pounding out of your chest. It doesn't matter how many roller coasters you've been on. Overall, this is a really full feeling ride. It does a lot of things really well, but I just like the rides I put over it a little more for like individual reasons. There's nothing for me really to dock points off of here, but there's also nothing pushing it to that next level. Powder Keg is the most hyper, non-hyper coaster that I've been on. This one also starts with a really strong launch, except this one comes from a dead stop. Air launches are really good, like I don't think we give them enough credit. I think they're the strongest kick on any launch coasters, even more than hydraulic coasters, and this one is a really good example of that. They got the stoplights, they got the fire, and they got the bleachers. It really is a spectacle launching off into that top hat first drop thing. And the rest of the layout is basically a hyper coaster. It has big airtime hills and high turns. You also feel really high up because you're on the hilltop with the trees, so even though it's not hyper height, it definitely feels like it. And then halfway through the ride, you just switched tracks? What? Why? It's pretty jarring on ride. Like, they definitely weren't trying to hide it. You do actually feel the ride get a little bit rougher. Like, literally, they just connected the tracks like Lego pieces. And then there's a lift hill in the middle, which is a bit odd, but like, you do some more turns and drops after, and it goes into the brakes. It is a weird ride, but that almost gives it a charm that other rides just don't have. I kind of like it. The lift hill in the middle prevents it from going higher, but I didn't even think it was going to make this list. If you were paying attention when I was talking about Great Bear, you'll notice that I called it the best invert I've been on, and that includes over Montu. So yes, I'm a KUMBA over Montu kind of person, and while that might have to do with the fact that I had a sunset ride in KUMBA and a first ride of the day on Montu, I still think that with both of these rides running at their peak, I would prefer KUMBA. KUMBA is one of the only coasters that genuinely feels like it's trying to hurt you. When people say a ride tears through its layout, they're referring to this. That term was coined because of KUMBA. Every element hits. The vertical loop hits. The pacing on this ride is really top notch, and it's the only thing that makes this ride even worth mentioning. Because like really, when you look at the layout, you'll see that it's not really that impressive. It's basically Scream, and you know damn well Scream isn't making no top 25. But this ride is different. It's a little shaky, and it's a hike to get to the back of the park, but it's 100% worth it, and hopefully won't be leaving anytime soon. Okay, so take everything I said about KUMBA and now add an incline launch in the beginning. Actually, that's not entirely true. These rides are similar, but there are a few key differences that make Hulk better. First of all, there is that launch, like I said, and let me just say, I've been on Dragster, I've been on I've been on Maverick and Velocicoaster, but the Hulk's launch is so much better than all of those. You're at a pretty steep incline, you're surrounded by a tunnel with lights and the sound effects, and when you finally blast off into the zero-G roll, you'll hear the roar of the Hulk behind you. It's just a perfect launch that leads into a great layout. That's another thing. This layout is kind of crazy. You go into a zero-G roll, and then a massive Cobra roll, then a loop, and you finish with some corkscrews. It looks like the dream, but like somewhat realistic B&M looper that you make in Planet Coaster, but you know will never get built, but like it could actually get built, and it did actually get built. The on-ride audio is a nice touch, and the setting of the lake is really cool. I will say I don't think the ride runs as consistently fast as KUMBA, but like all the other things I mentioned make up for it. Some people say which ride you like is up to personal preference, but out of these two, this is like a pretty clear winner for me. Like I'm never gonna say KUMBA is better than Hulk. Hulk still runs really fast, just not as fast as KUMBA, but it is a lot smoother than KUMBA is. So overall, Hulk is a really good ride, and it's my highest ranked B&M looper. I'm not really gonna talk about this ride because we'll never experience it in the same form again. I'm almost certain the hydraulic launch will be gone, so talking about it for a while just seems like a waste of time with the revamp, so I'm moving on. Yes, I have KAW over Dragster, and I explained in my ranking last year, but I'll give you the cliff notes again here. KAW has a longer and faster launch, and you can feel it. You can't feel like the extra 20 feet taller, but you can feel the extra 10 miles per hour faster. The airtime hill after also is a better way to end the ride. It gives you actual airtime, and it's less abrupt than just hitting the magnetic brakes. Overall, I think this is going to be a much more interesting conversation when the new Dragster reopens, but for right now, I still have KAW barely ahead. This is a ride I have mixed emotions on. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good ride, but there are just much better versions of it, specifically MAKO. I'm going to talk about MAKO later, but CANDYMONIUM doesn't really do anything better than MAKO, and because of that, I can't put it any higher. It's a little short for a hyper, the outer bank is a nice touch, but it doesn't actually do anything, and the Kisses fountain isn't even always on. Also, no one likes a brown coaster. Like, it literally looks like shit. I'm sorry, this is easily the ugliest B&M coaster I've ever seen. I know I've mostly been saying negative stuff about this ride, but there are a lot of positives to this ride, hence the number 14 ranking, but I'll really be talking about those with MAKO, so I'm just gonna move on. From one of the newest hypers to one of the first ones ever built. Well, actually, to the first one ever built. Magnum still holds up as a great ride, even among the all-star collection at Cedar Point. I won't lie, the first half isn't fantastic. The drop isn't super steep, the hills are drawn out, and the turnaround is pretty rough. Actually, the whole thing is pretty rough, and the brick lap bars you have in your lap don't get any more comfortable. But the finale is what makes this ride this high. The last string of airtime hills are so poorly designed that they are comically aggressive. Remember how I said KUMBA was trying to kill you? This has that same intensity, but like for airtime hills. Like that's manageable for inversions just because they're inversions, but imagine what that would do to you on an airtime hill. Like you can just see from the POVs that these hills are literally triangles. It's like Pythagorean theoreming you out of your chair. It also just has a presence at Cedar Point. Like even though it's dwarfed by like 5 coasters in the park now, it still is a spectacle at its entrance. The Magnum entrance is also the best entrance, which gives it a couple brownie points. Overall, the original hyper is still better than a lot of hypers built today. I have a whole video on why I like this ride. I'm not going to explain it here. Just watch that video. It's one of my best. The highest ranked coaster at Silver Dollar City is the one that everyone has the highest ranked. Now, yeah, this ride is a little bumpy, but it's not to like a debilitating level. I've said this before, but I don't understand why people expect the wooden coaster to be glass smooth. That's not how these rides are supposed to be. They're supposed to have some texture. I like my wooden coasters with a bite to them because it makes the ride really feel out of control, and I think that's the best way to describe this ride. Out of control. Every airtime hill, every inversion, every twist, every turn feels like it's trying to throw you off the side of the cliff. And the setting really does play a big role in this ride, just like it does in Powder Keg and Time Traveler. Flying through the woods sideways, upside down, and over airtime separates this ride from all the other RMCs. Like really, imagine if this ride wasn't in the woods. It would just be like a normal RMC. But just for the setting alone, it brings it up a couple spots, and it makes it one of the most beloved RMCs out there. Back-to-back RMCs, except instead of flying through the woods on a mountain, you're flying through a parking lot. But I think that really speaks to how good this ride is, because there's no like, well, I mean, I guess there is a gimmick that is boosting it, but it's not a bad gimmick. The racing aspect is genius. Even if you don't race, it's still a fun ride, but being on the green lift hill and looking back and seeing the blue train catching up to you, it just elevates the experience so much more. I'm like 99% sure the blue lift hill is faster so you can catch up, because I did get a racing ride where the green train was like halfway up the lift and we caught up and raced perfectly. And when you do get a racing ride, it kicks the ride up to another level. Like if this ride consistently raced, then this would definitely be 2 or 3 spots higher. Being right across, under, and above another train while going through these inversions and airtime hills is something you can't get anywhere else. Except West Coast Racers on the other side of the park. But to be honest, when this ride races, it's better. The blue side is definitely better than the green side, but they're not like that different. Like the green side is still really good. It's 2 rides in one, which I know everyone says, but you don't really appreciate that until you get on it. 2 very short rides in one, but it's 2 rides nonetheless. It's like if you did Twisted Colossus once or the original Raptors twice. Now, I know a lot of people might be wondering why this isn't higher, and it really comes down to the fact that there's not a ton of standout elements here. Like the best part of the ride is the first drops on both sides. The inversions are pretty standard and the airtime is really good, but besides the high five moment, there's really nothing specific to this RMC that stands out. Like, yeah, I know the blue camelback is good, but like when has RMC not done a good camelback? It sounds like I'm being harsh on this ride, but like I still really like it. It just doesn't have that one moment that pushes it really high. I'm incredibly biased for this ride. This was my first B&M Hyper and probably my most ridden coaster ever, but I do still think this is an amazing ride. First of all, it's a really big ride. I know a lot of Hypers are big, but this one is 230 feet. Like this is solidly on its way to a giga. And the layout is really diverse. You have an amazing first drop, some crazy trimless airtime hills into this bone-crushing double helix until you reach the airtime finale with quick pops of strong floater. Not quite ejector, but it'll definitely catch you off guard. This might get rethemed this year, which would actually suck because I kind of like the pink and yellow and blue color scheme. I know some people think it's ugly, but for me, it's just different. Like there's not a single other company in the world that would have the balls to combine yellow and pink for a coaster color scheme. That's something only Six Flags would do. Definitely ride Nitro if you go to Great Adventure. I know people only talk about ElToro, but it's really close to Toro in my rankings. I mentioned before that MAKO is just a better version of CANDYMONIUM, and that's probably the most accurate comparison I've made in this video. MAKO has everything that CANDYMONIUM lacks. It's longer, it has stronger airtime, it has a better ending, it has a better setting, it has a better color scheme, a better name, and it consistently runs faster because of the hot Florida sun. I'm convinced this is the perfect B&M hypercoaster, and I really don't think Diamondback or Behemoth or even freaking Shambhala would change that. You might be confused why this ride is so high, but I have a whole video that mostly talks about why this ride is great. It's talking about themed roller coasters as a whole, but it uses this as like a case study for the perfectly themed coaster. So if you want my in-depth thoughts, go there. I'll link it in the card of the description or somewhere. I don't know, it's not gonna be hard to find. You might be confused why this ride is so high, but I have a whole video that mostly talks about why this ride is great. It's talking about themed roller coasters as a whole, but it uses this as like a case study for the perfectly themed coaster. So if you want my in-depth thoughts, go there. I'll link it in the card of the description or somewhere. I don't know, it's not gonna be hard to find. Now I'm putting these in one spot, but it's very possible that they wouldn't be. I rode Jersey Devil when it first opened, so like the thing was running like hella slow. Like what am I even looking at here? But I'm pretty sure that they closed it to fix it and make it run faster because I've heard it's a lot better now. And even just looking at recent footage, like the difference is night and day. I don't know if they changed the wheels or something, but there is a huge difference on Wonder Woman, and I'm pretty sure Jersey Devil now. Wonder Woman is higher than Twisted Colossus for 2 reasons. First, the drop. The drop in the back row is probably the best drop on any coaster besides El Toro. It's definitely the best drop on an RMC, and the fact that you're single file for it makes it that much better. Second, the pacing. This is crucial. If it's running like Jersey Devil was when it opened, then these rides would be cheeks. I don't even know if they would crack the top 25, but running at full speed, this is almost a top 5 ride. And honestly, I could have moved it higher. It really makes me excited to get on those small scale Raptors because I've heard those run even faster, which seems like impossible to me. And the layout is really good too. It's not just the model that makes this ride rank this high. The dive loop has airtime somehow. The Camelback is better than Twisted Colossus's. The stall is like the perfect length. There's a nice pop on the turnaround. The zero G roll is floaty. The mid-course doesn't even hit half the time. And the last run back has a surprising amount of ejector. And the bonus hills on Wonder Woman actually do something. Like they're not just thrown in there to get back to the station. I mean, they are, but like at least you get something out of it. These are both just really underrated rides and are must-dos at their parks. Now I used to have this a little higher, but after riding Velocicoaster, this has dropped a couple spots for obvious reasons. This ride is still incredible though. It kicks off with an incline launch, which isn't super forceful, but it's still better than just like a plain lift hill. Then you go into Beyond Vertical Drop, which flings you out of your seat and brings you into these tight twists. And Intamin does these twists on a lot of their rides, but like it's never done as good on Maverick, except maybe I-305. The airtime hill is probably in the top 10 best airtime moments, and the versions are all snappy. The second launch in the tunnel like blasts you out into intense turnaround that leads into violent stangle dives. There's a speed hill towards the end that's low-key just as good as the first one. Overall, it's a near perfect launch coaster, but Velocicoaster does kind of show its flaws. Like if this was taller, it would be better. I don't care that they made the best out of it. It just would be better if this had more height. And it's not a short ride at all, but again, Velocicoaster is just longer and it uses like the same structure of like splitting it in half with the launch. I know it seems like I'm comparing this to Velocicoaster, and that's because I am. Velocicoaster just does everything Maverick does like a little bit better. And it's kind of like a MAKO CANDYMONIUM situation, but again, in this case, Maverick or the CANDYMONIUM isn't a bad ride, it's just not as good, so I can't rank it higher. I vowed to never talk about this ride again, so I'm skipping it. So another year later, and El Toro is yet again closed for another incident. I did, however, manage to squeeze another ride in on it, which did solidify its spot ahead of SKYRUSH, but I don't really feel like talking about it too much because, like, you know why El Toro's good. Best first drop in a coaster, camelbacks, blah, 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 blah. Actually, I don't really feel about talking about the rest of these coasters on this list either, because I've talked, like, about them to death, and so is everyone else. So number 2 is Seal Vengeance, and number 1 is Velocicoaster. What a shocker, it hasn't changed. I have separate videos on both of those if you want to check them out, so you should, because this video is over. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.